than 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth was formed. Many years later, just about 700 million years ago, the first fauna has existed. And with the flourishing of life, comes a plethora of majestic life cycles. This is not just a simple project for school. This is a story of carbon, a tale which started billions of years ago and marked the beginning of the grand, magnificent carbon cycle.
The carbon cycle starts with a plant. Carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is absorbed by all plants and bacteria. Then, they utilize the sun's energy to transform that carbon into oxygen and sugar, which they use to grow through photosynthesis. They release some carbon back into the atmosphere as they grow. All plants, however, perish. Bacteria devour some, while larger creatures consume others. These creatures eat the plant to get energy and emit carbon. However, these animals die too, and end up on the ground.
Meanwhile, something similar is happening deep within the oceans and seas. To live, corals and plankton need carbon from the sea. Fortunately, water contains carbon because it absorbs it from the atmosphere. When rain falls on the planet, it absorbs carbon from the atmosphere and rocks before returning to the ocean, where planktons and other organisms utilize it to thrive. But death excuses no one, so plankton and corals die too. In a nutshell, all living beings are carbon-based, and they all end in the ground.
Some of this carbon is emitted into the atmosphere, while some remains underground. Dead creatures usually decompose and turn into rocks. They are eventually crushed, and the high heat and pressure lead them to melt and release the contained carbon under the Earth's surface. When volcanoes erupt, some of the stored carbon escape into the atmosphere. The cycle then begins anew. However, dead creatures do not always transform into rocks. When dead organisms do not decompose quickly enough, they convert into oil, coal, or natural gases. This carbon becomes encased into the Earth. This magnificent environmental system maintains carbon cycling all over Earth at a steady rate. The presence of carbon into the atmosphere prevents some heat from leaving the Earth. It keeps the Earth's temperature stable.
Unfortunately, the planet has been invaded by an invading species. These non-native species have colonized a new location to the point of causing damage to the environment and are regarded as one of the top 5 threats to our ecology. This newly introduced invasive species began extracting carbon from the Earth. They brought back the carbon that had been trapped below into the atmosphere, and they accomplished so much in a short time that one glorious cycle was destroyed. Consequently, too much carbon in the atmosphere causes part of the heat that would usually escape to dart back and be trapped in the Earth. As a result, the Earth's temperature began to rise.
The problem caused by the disruption of the carbon cycle was so severe that in 2019, a group of scientists said they might only have 12 years to stop a disastrous amount of warming. This means that these invasive species need to stop putting carbon in the atmosphere and get carbon out of the atmosphere. One of the best ways to do this is to prevent activities that have anthropogenic effects on the carbon cycle, such as uncontrolled and unregulated logging, mining, and excessive use of coal and other fossil fuels. Another way to fix the broken carbon cycle is to grow more plants and trees or raise livestock that could help restore grass. The Earth is now facing a crisis because of the disrupted carbon cycle. But this is not yet too late. There is still hope, and the best way to survive is to let these destructive invasive species, the humans, realize their misdoings.
The study of how cells influence gene activity without modifying the DNA sequence is known as epigenetics. In Greek, epi means above. Thus, Epigenetics refers to variables other than the genetic code. Epigenetic alterations are DNA modifications that control whether genes are switched on or off. DNA methylation is a typical kind of epigenetic alterations. DNA methylation is attaching tiny chemical groups known as methyl groups to DNA building units. When methyl groups are found on a gene, it is shut off or silenced, and no protein is created.
Histone modification is another typical epigenetic alteration. Histones are structural proteins found in the nucleus of cells. The structure of chromosomes is determined by the way DNA wraps around histones. Histones may be altered by adding or removing chemical groups such as methyl or acetyl groups. The chemical groups control how firmly the DNA is wrapped around histones, determining whether a gene can be switched on or off.
By far, the most pressing concern of our time is global warming. While numerous attempts are being made by many organizations to repair the life cycles, it is important to recognize that there is no fast remedy. For us, the quickest route ahead is to go from indifference to commitment, since no one else would deal with the situation but ourselves.